guys are ready, we might as well get started. It's almost 4 here.
Yep.
And people can just keep logging on. So Lisa, should I start and then pass it over to you for tech?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So welcome everyone to another Friends from the Field webinar. We're super excited to have 2 presenters tonight, Leslie Anderson and Sheryl Coffin. And I think I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves since you have slides to do that. But we're super excited to have both of them here to share how their art is inspired by conservation and other things as well. If this is the first time you're joining this webinar series called Friends from the Field, it is co-hosted by Blue Hill Heritage Trust, which is a community conservation organization for the Blue Hill Peninsula, and Island Heritage Trust, a similar organization, a land trust for Deer Isle, Stonington, and the surrounding islands. We've also been hosting this webinar series for almost 2 years now, and we have a huge archive of past recordings of fabulous webinars. So if you have a little cabin fever and you need something to do and want to learn something about the natural world, feel free to go to the Blue Hill Heritage Trust YouTube page or either of our organization websites to check out recordings. So I think I'll pass it over to Lisa now, and then we'll invite our speakers to start presenting. Thank you all for joining us.
Sure. So we will be doing questions. Do you think we should do all together at the end or after each individual?
Oh.
Okay. So question. Yeah.
I think so. I guess we should have.
No,
I guess
I didn't.
we talked about that. I forgot. We have 2 presenters. What do Leslie and Cheryl? Do you have a preference?
Either way is fine. Maybe at the end. So
I think at the end.
Okay. Okay, so yes, we will be doing questions at the end of the 2 presentations. We have the chat feature, which should be at the bottom of your bar. So feel free to pop any questions into the chat and we will address them at the end. We also do, if you feel like you want to do an audio question, you can use the raise your hand feature, and we will also get to those at the end. We will bring your audio into the webinar and you can ask your question from there. And I think Sheryl was going first, correct?
I can, yes.
I forget, I know we decided, but.
I think it may have been the other way around, but it's all right.
Go for it.
Yeah, either or. But
I'm
yeah.
working on screen share now, so. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Lander and Lisa, for inviting both Leslie and me to speak here at the Blue Hill Heritage Trust and Island Heritage Trust Artist Talks. My name is Sheryl Coffin, and I have been coming to the Blue Hill Peninsula all my life. In the summer, when I was growing up, we lived on Newberry Neck in Surry, which is where I live now, not the same place, but very close to the same place. And even when I lived and worked in many places outside of Maine, I always came back, and the landscape here and nature here has been a constant part of my entire life. Another part of my life has been being a pathologist and making diagnoses on tissue from living patients who've had some surgery, and spending a lot of time looking through the microscope to do that. And another part of my life ever since early childhood has been a strong interest both in looking at various types of art and engaging in drawing, painting, printmaking, and occasionally even sculpture. So the talk today will combine these interests in the place, the beautiful Blue Hill Peninsula, my interest in art, and some of how my background in pathology has influenced what I do in art.
Sheryl,
yes.
Sorry, just quickly to interrupt, are you trying to screen share right now?
Yes.
Because
Is it not?
We don't currently see anything, at least I don't. Is that the case for you, Lisa and Leslie? Okay, maybe try
Good.
one more time, Cheryl.
All right. Sorry about that.
And then just quickly, we had a question in the chat box about getting rid of the rest of our faces, because it's a lot to have everyone on here while we have one presenter. You
Yeah.
can do that yourself. If you go up into the right-hand corner of your screen and hit view, you should be able to hit speaker, and then you'll just get the speaker's face. So
Okay.
try that and see if it works. And also Cheryl will have her slideshow up, and so that will kind of take precedence as well. I hope that helps, and let me know if you have other questions.
Is it up now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So these are images of the four seasons here on the Blue Hill Peninsula. Many of these are taken right from our house or on walks that we take on Blue Hill Heritage Trust lands in the town of Surry, where we live, and on Patton Bay and Union River Bay, which our house faces. And some of you may recognize some of these locations, others might not be familiar to you. The colors of the seasons, the beautiful light in Maine at all times of year, the textures and shapes of plants, rocks, water, are all things that I carry in my visual memory. Uh-oh. So here is a painting, a watercolor of moonlight on the bay during the winter, during the COVID season, which was has been a very productive time for me artistically. In the spring, one of the first things that comes out is a flower called coltsfoot. This is a very large watercolor painting of coltsfoot. It's a little flower that looks like a dandelion, but it isn't. However, it's even more invasive than dandelion, which I didn't realize when I first started encouraging it to grow in our yard. But I think it's pretty. And so I've done a series of paintings on that. Another thing that I love about the landscape here is the native white pine that can assume a lot of different shapes and seems to adapt to all sorts of harsh environments. And then finally, this is an abstract painting that shows the influence of fall colors on how I paint, even though the subject of this painting is completely different from the landscape or nature in the Blue Hill Peninsula. I do most of my work in my studio, except for sketches, occasional small watercolor paintings on a portable, with a portable palette, and occasional small drawings. So this is the studio that I have at home, cleaned up for this presentation. And then the theme of the paintings that I'm going to talk about today has to do with the great blue heron. We see great blue herons fairly frequently in this area, both as their summer, the place where they live in the summer, and as they migrate north to Canada for nesting sites in different places on the Atlantic coast. Last year, in May, I heard from someone at the Nature Conservancy of Canada about a heron named Harper, shown here, who had flown over our bay here in Surry and had ended up on her island for nesting in Miramichi Bay in the North Atlantic on the coast of New Brunswick, and had also flown over a place in Miramichi Bay that I had been going to for much of my life and really loved in terms of the landscape. Harper has become famous. I didn't realize it when I started my series of paintings about Harper and her adventures, but she has a very long migration from northern New Brunswick to Cuba, back and forth every spring and fall. And she usually only stops once or twice on this migration. So she flies over 2,000 miles, almost nonstop. Here's where she spends her summer, Miramichi Bay, New Brunswick, in northern New Brunswick, looking out to the Atlantic Ocean. There's an island called Fox Island where a lot of herons have nesting sites, and it's a preserve. And here's the land that I'm familiar with called the Gardner Point Preserve on the Escuminac Peninsula in New Brunswick. And you can see Fox Island and another island, Bay de Vin Island, from here. So when I heard about Harper and her travels, I was really fascinated by this coincidence that she flies not only over where we live here in Maine, but also ends up in another place that's special to me. Now, a brief detour into the visual world of a pathologist. These are things that I saw through my microscope. And I discovered a few years ago that no matter what I do artistically, somehow images that resemble these microscopic pictures of different diseases in humans end up in one way or another in my drawings, paintings, and prints. So this was one of the first paintings I did in the Harper series, which is an aerial view of where she would fly to get to her nesting island, Fox Island, and then some experimentation with images she might see or might be aware of as she looked for food in the water and in the salt marshes around there. This is a watercolor with many layers and also some resist with white crayon and areas where rock salt was applied to both absorb the pigment and the moisture from the watercolor and leave iron stains on the paper. Another way that I approached the aerial view of Harper's destination in northern New Brunswick has to do with this kind of abstraction, which takes the colors in the landscape, but you can definitely see the influence of cellular morphology here. Here's Harper with some of her friends, probably gathering to say hello after a long winter and a long migration up to Fox Island in this very humid place. And here are some herons who could be either flying around or swimming through the water looking for fish. And as I was doing these paintings, I was imagining herons. I was using some of the shapes, many of the shapes that you actually see in herons, but was not trying at all to stay true to the color of the birds. We see great blue herons on our beach, and most of these photos are taken from my studio window or from another few windows in our house. One of them is as late as December 1st this year. The others are probably between June and September. It's hard to get close to them because they're very shy. And as soon as they see a human approaching, even from quite a distance, they tend to fly off. So here's a heron flying off into the rain, avoiding that human gaze and looking up into something interesting in the sky. I also thought about some of the reefs and rock formations that Harper might fly over as she was traveling around, especially looking for things to eat. And there's a series of ledges across the bay from us where we sometimes go kayaking, which is a great place for herons to stand and look for fish going by to make a nice lunch. But after I did this painting that I thought was inspired by the reef, I came across a photomicrograph that I had taken quite a few years ago that looks a lot like this painting. And this is another example of how visual memory and the artistic hand can play tricks on you, and unusual things can show up. When the tide is low in front of our house, we'll often see bird tracks in the sand and in the mud. So here are some heron tracks finding their way through a wet area. In the fall, this past fall, a diagram was published of Harper's migration from northern New Brunswick to Cuba. I should mention that Harper was tagged as a project with the Maine Heron Network in May 2019. And so she has a GPS inserted that's solar powered, so that people tracking her can always find out where she is. So she flew nonstop for 40 hours to Bermuda, spent 3 days there, then flew another 30 hours to the Bahamas, rested for 8 hours, and then finished the final leg of her 2,130-mile journey that took 7 days. So I started thinking about what her journey south might have been. Up here, we often have foggy weather, and herons have interesting eyes, much more sophisticated in some ways than human eyes. They have receptors for 6 different kinds of color. We only have 4, and they can see almost all the way around their head, unlike us who only have probably about 180 degrees, maybe 280 degrees of rotation ability with our neck. So here's Harper and her friends looking into the fog, figuring out where to go, what to see, maybe what to eat. And here they are at night, gazing at the landscape, maybe enjoying the moonlight. The heron's eyes led to this abstraction after I thought about how their color perception might make it easier for them to fly through a forest, because they see forests differently than we do. It's not all green, it's green, yellow, purple, and other colors, so they can avoid running into trees and branches if they're flying through a densely forested area. And again, in this one, you can also see the cellular influence. And finally, Harper's tropical destination of the island of Cuba, here shown aerially and abstractly with tropical colors and nice heat for her winter stay. While she flew to Cuba, and maybe when she arrived there, she probably flew by a lot of coastal villages with interesting fall colors or tropical colors as she was flying overhead. And just to show you that everything that comes around goes around, way back when I was between my sophomore and junior year of high school, I went to a residential workshop in the summer for high school students who wanted to learn printmaking. And I did some dry point etchings on plastic plates in way back in 1969. So on the small image is the actual plastic plate that I carved into, and the image on paper labeled 2 Herons artist proof is the print made by rubbing ink into the area where I'd scratched on the plastic plate and then running it through a printing press and getting the ink that was embedded in the scratches. So I realized when I discovered these, as I was going through an old portfolio a few weeks ago, that my interest in herons was really nothing new. I'd like to thank you all for listening. I'd like to thank the Blue Hill Heritage Trust and the Island Heritage Trust, especially Chrissy Allen, Lander Nesbitt, Martha Bell, and Lisa Huxtable from those organizations for helping organize this and helping with figuring out the technical challenges. And then some of the artists who've been especially good about, many of the artists who've been especially good about teaching me. The Nature Conservancy of New Brunswick, Canada in New Brunswick, who got me interested in the migratory path of the herons and how this area of Maine is involved on their pathway, and then families, friends, and artistic and medical colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl.
You're welcome.
And pass the torch to Leslie and then save questions for the end. Feel free.
All right.
If you just quickly, everyone in the audience, if you would like to start putting questions in the chat box so you don't forget them as they come up, feel free to do that. And then Lisa and I will help comb through them at the end and make sure Cheryl and Leslie see them. Okay.
Thank you, Lander, and thank you, Blue Hill Heritage Trust for and Island Heritage Trust for inviting me to do this. It has been a very, very interesting and, for me, enriching experience putting all of this together. So, okay, here we go to share screen. Okay, so did this come up? Are you seeing something different on your screen?
It looks good, Leslie.
Okay, great. So in 2002, which is, gosh, 20 years ago already, my husband, Dan Nygaard, and I decided to leave our lives in high tech in the Boston area. And we bought a farm in Sedgwick, Maine on the Blue Hill Peninsula. So after almost 20 years working with software startups, for me, for sure, it was time for something new. And we looked for 3 years to find a place where we could have our farm that we dreamed about. And one of the reasons that we chose the Blue Hill Peninsula was that we were already familiar with it because we had had a cottage in Surry that we shared with a couple of other Boston families. We'd had that for 20 years. But when we started looking at places off the peninsula, we were struck by how different the Blue Hill Peninsula is. And I think one of the reasons for that is the abundance of open space on the peninsula, which of course is thanks to the conservation work done by the Blue Hill Heritage Trust. So when this transition occurred 20 years ago, I wanted to paint and Dan wanted to be a flower farmer. So 20 years later, we are actually still married and still painting and still farming. So a bit about my artist education. When I started painting at 50 years old, my method was to find the best teachers I could through Boston area adult education. And my first foray into this new world was watercolor. Partly out of curiosity about new mediums and partly for economic reasons, I eventually evolved to acrylics and then oils, mainly because you don't have to frame them under glass. And also because in my naivete, I didn't realize that buyers were willing to pay more for acrylics and oils. Until, as you'll see later on in this talk, the pandemic fostered a return to watercolors and a return to Blue Hill Heritage Trust properties as subject matter. So when I started painting, one of my first muses and one of my ongoing muses was Blue Hill Mountain. They're just a recurring thread through all of my work, as you'll see. So this was a watercolor painting that I did of Blue Hill Mountain in 2003. And this painting was actually purchased by a Canadian collector and launched my career as a painter. After a couple of years, I ventured, as I said, into solid media. So one of my first forays into acrylics, which was how I transitioned. First I did collages and then I did acrylics as a way of transitioning into what I call solid media, as opposed to, I mean, it's all fluid, but acrylics and, well, watercolor, you have to let flow, and acrylics and oils, you get to push around. So that for me is the difference. So one of my first forays into acrylics was actually a suite of 4 paintings, 12 by 12 paintings, which are now in the collection of the Blue Hill Heritage Trust. And when you walk into the office, you see them hanging over the very first desk, which you see when you walk in. This painting was called Opere Lupins, and I painted it up on the mountain after the lupins had gone by. I was just as interested in the lupins catching the late afternoon sun as I was in them when they're their beautiful blue color. And then eventually I found my way to oils. We were living in Portland when Dan was doing a sabbatical stint at Bowdoin. And I asked around and said, who's the best teacher? And everyone said, oh, you have to study with Janet Mannion. I said, what does she teach? Oils. I don't paint in oils. Well, you will now. So I took the class, and it was fortuitous because I thought I was allergic to all of the solvents that go along with painting in oils. And in this class, we learned a lot about modern materials, including the products that are made by Robert Gamblin, including Gamsol, which is a low VOC solvent, which it's not exactly not dangerous, but it doesn't smell and it doesn't give me any respiratory issues. So here I was, launched in oils. This is one of my very first oil paintings. It was done in 2008. And I did it as something that I could donate to the Blue Hill Congregational Church, of which I'm a member. I wanted to donate something special to their first ever Blueberry Festival. So I chose the mountain as my subject because our minister at the time, Rob McCall, had a very close association with the mountain, which he considered a sacred place. He always referred to it as Awanajo, which in the Algonquian language means small misty mountain. And I'm pleased to say that the painting was purchased in the silent auction by a young woman who begged her grandma to buy it for her. This painting was done this is from 2012. This is a different view of the mountain since I actually hauled all of my stuff halfway up the front face of the mountain to where there's a stone bench. And my plan was I would get to that stone bench and sit to do this painting. But when I got up there was actually another artist already perched on the bench. So I had to go over a couple of 100 feet away from her and set up. Another view of Blue Hill from the golf course. I did this in 2013. This is oil on birch panel. And I did this painting with a palette knife as opposed to a brush, which is my more usual method, because I had a wrist injury and it was painful to hold the brush. And when I look back at this painting, I kind of wonder, why don't I do this more often? I was delighted when the art historian Carl Little chose this painting to be the Maine Community Foundation's Christmas card that year. So another main muse for me is the Carter Nature Preserve. And as I mentioned, our first cottage on the peninsula was near Morgan Bay Zendo. We shared it for 20 years, actually, with 3 other Boston families. And our very first major charitable contribution was a gift to the Friends of Morgan Bay in 1994. We were helping them conserve what is now the Carter Nature Preserve. So I love all of the preserve, but I have a special fascination with the serpentine formed by the outflow of Emerton Brook into Morgan Bay, where it crosses the road from the entrance, right next to the entrance to the preserve. There's something about sinuous shapes that have always spoken to me. And this is another one of the 4 12x12 acrylics that are in the collection of the Blue Hill Heritage Trust. This is another view of that same serpentine. I think I'm over at the parking area, further over to the left, seeing more of the actual brook. And of course, those of you who are familiar with this area know that when the tide is out, this is nothing but a mud flat. So you could paint this a million times and never have it be the same painting twice. This one was done on prepared paper, which gives it a softer look. And some people who have seen it thought, oh, I didn't know you do pastel. Well, I don't. Yet another view of the estuary. This is from 2011. This is on oil on panel. Another place I love to go paint is Camp Stream. And where I like to go is up where Camp Stream crosses the Kingdom Road in Blue Hill. And one of the reasons I like this spot is that I can park my car and sit in the hatchback, the back of the Subaru, and actually paint out the back of the car, which is about as deluxe as it gets for a plein air painter. Another view of different area from that same spot where it crosses Kingdom Road, of the swamp maples. I love them because they're the very first thing to turn red in the fall. And then this is a watercolor that I did in 2020, I think, from the same spot as I did the first one. Another fun place for me to go is Patton Stream. I love where the outflow is at the Surry Town Landing. This painting from 2019, it's oil on linen, was actually painted over a dead painting. And I don't do this that often, but it's kind of fun. And again, looking through old work, I thought, why don't I do this more often? Because this was painted on linen. Linen is a very, very, very durable surface. And I can actually take an orbital sander and sand down the old painting and prepare it to put more paint on. As a plein air surface, it's really great because the paint won't sink in at all. So the surface builds up really, really fast. And I did this painting in one go, which was probably about 2 hours. And some of the light areas you see, especially in the back where the trees are kind of just showing through, were areas that I scraped out with a credit card to reveal the old painting underneath. That's a technique called pentimento, and I just really like saying that word. Here's another painting from the same spot. This is a watercolor that I did in 2020. So that brings us to the pandemic. Dan and I live about half the year at our farm in Sedgwick, and the other half of the year we live in a condo in downtown Portland. And when the pandemic hit, lockdown began in March of 2020, we weren't very comfortable living in our downtown condo. And we thought we would feel better if we could be at our farm in Sedgwick, and at least we could feel safe being outdoors and just would feel better. So that's what we did. But when summer came, normally, as soon as it gets warm, I pack up my oil paintings into my big backpack that I have for plein air painting. And I couldn't do it. I was just overwhelmed. I just felt at 6s and 7s, and I just couldn't haul my plein air painting stuff out into the field. So I returned to watercolors. And my method would be to hike or bike to a favorite place with a small watercolor kit and just lose myself in the immediacy of the medium and the moment. So you got to remember back, summer of 2020, it was no vaccine, not on the horizon, before the election. It was a very, very, very fraught time. This is the Bag of Deuce from Bluff Head. And the day that I was up there painting, it was so windy, I practically had to bungee myself to the rock to keep from blowing off. This is another one from the Carter Nature Preserve. I had hiked the preserve, doing the landward part first, and then hiking back along the rocky shore, which I love to do. And as you know, you can only do at low tide. Another one of Petersbrook Falls. This was an especially fun one. I hiked up to the top where the observation platform is and went a little bit off to the side. Don't tell Hans. And thought, how am I going to do this? This is impossible. It's rushing water going down the side of a gorge. So I just tried to turn my thinking brain off and started putting down washes of color. And I had some colored pencils in my kit. So I started carving into the wet wash to give the illusion of rocks. And it was really fun. And it's a technique I've adopted in a lot of my paintings. Another view of Blue Hill Mountain. This is from one of those little pull-offs just below the golf course. This was the very first snow, which was early. Actually, it was election day. It was November 6th, 2020. So then comes winter again. And thanks to a mild fall, I was able to paint outdoors until November. But when it was finally time to return to the studio, I was lost. Once again, I thought, oh, what am I going to do? I just don't know what to paint. So then on an early December day, I took a hike on the Heart of Blue Hill Trail, starting from the parking lot of the Congregational Church. And within a few hundred feet of the trailhead, I had found my muse. this wall of moss and ferns and trees, so green and so alive in the dead of winter, I instantly knew I had to paint it. So this was the first painting done from that bank. I decided to call it Winter's Green because that sure is what it is. This is 18 by 24 oil on linen. And this one was exploring the mosses, the way they drop, they drape themselves over the rocks. These rocks struck me as being all dressed up with nowhere to go. They were just so decked out. The next one in what I was beginning to think was probably going to be a triptych, focused more on the ferns. And then a third one, again, exploring the mosses, but also having interest in the baby conifers springing up in the background. So this painting ended up being framed as a triptych. And it just meant a lot to me. You know, as I said, I started thinking of these rocks as goddesses. They were such an unexpected oasis in the midst of what was a very dark winter. And in making these paintings, for me, I began the journey out of the darkness and back into the light. A funny thing about this painting, as I said, it meant a lot to me. I thought maybe I wanted to keep it. I don't do that with very many paintings. But in early June, a woman walked into my studio and said, "I'm looking for a green painting." And I said, "Well, perhaps you've come to the right place." So she did buy the painting. And I offered to go to her home in Brooksville and help her hang it. And I was still thinking, what have I done? Why have I let this painting go? I really didn't want to sell this painting. And as the second I walked into her living room and saw the tones of green and rust and gold in that room, I thought, oh my God, this painting just was meant to live here. So soon I was seeing mossy paintings everywhere. That's what happens sometimes when you start with a subject. And I was doing some physical therapy on the East Blue Hill Road at Wellness Chiropractic, and feeling so good after a treatment, I decided to go for a walk up the hill. And I spied this young man. It was right after a rainstorm. He was fishing for, I don't know what he would find in that crazy tannin infused brook. But he was such a wonderful image that I had to do a painting of him. This is a big painting for me. This is 40 inches by 30 inches. And I had actually scored some giant linen canvases at Martin's. So I thought, well, I think these working on this painting might get me through mud season until I can go and paint outdoors again. So in conclusion, as I said, we're celebrating our 20th year of both farming and painting on the Blue Hill Peninsula. And we're deeply grateful to the Trust for the work that it does and for the, you know, as you can see, the continued inspiration that it provides to me. And I can't wait to see what new inspiration the properties of the Trust will bring in the next 20 years. And there are so many places where I have visited, but I haven't yet painted. So I can't wait to get back to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Both of those presentations were so incredibly beautiful.
Okay.
We would love to open it up for questions now. If anyone in the audience would like to put a question in the chat box. I've already had some really nice comments. Cheryl and Leslie, if you want to check out the chat box, people are loving the presentations. So thank you. And if also, as Lisa said, if you would like to raise your little virtual hand so you can ask them a question yourself, please feel free to do so.
Sitting here listening. Someone has asked a question about what are the biggest changes I've noticed in the herons over my time painting them. Well, I've only been painting them for about a year, but I've been watching them all my life, and I did that print way back when I was a teenager. I think I'm seeing fewer of them. A few years ago, I was walking on our beach and on our neighbor's beach, and I saw a whole group of them. They looked like it was in the fall, and it looked like they were on their migration south, and they were making a gronking sound at each other and kind of cavorting. But now, when I'm walking or kayaking or looking out the window, usually I don't see more than one or two. So that's changing. They are solitary birds, though. The population in Maine has been going down. I think it's great that the land trusts, the Blue Hill Heritage Trust and the Island Heritage Trust are doing a lot to conserve land that's good habitat for all sorts of birds, animals, plants, and so forth. So that's the biggest change.
Thank you, Sheryl. That same audience member was wondering about Leslie. Have there been any inspirations that have carried through your 20-year career aside from Maine?
Well, in the winter, I paint still life so that I'm, other than I do paint from photographs. I tend to paint off an iPad because I like the backlit screen and being able to zoom in on certain areas, but I can only do so much of that. So ironically, I love painting flowers, and I live on a flower farm. So you'd think I would be painting flowers all the time, but the flowers are usually, for those who know my husband, Dan's flower farm, he does weddings, parties, events, farmers markets. The flowers are usually spoken for, and I can't just go out and harvest whatever I want and set up a still life and do painting. So in the winter is when I paint flowers, and the flowers tend to come from Trader Joe's and Whole Foods. But I do love painting flowers. And sometimes I get to paint his. There's some on my website.
Wonderful. I just have to share, there are so many wonderful comments in the chat box here. But somebody was saying it was lovely to have such a personal look at both the artist and their work. So thank you for sharing your personal stories as well. It was really fun. And you can scroll through, there are more and more comments coming in. It's hard to keep up with them. Lisa, do you see any, or any more questions in there, or should I unmute someone who has their hand raised?
Oh, yes, we do have I don't see any more questions. Yeah, just a lot of wonderful comments. But yeah, I think go to hand raising.
Okay, it looks like Pamela has their hand raised, so I'm going to allow you to talk. And I think you just have to unmute yourself, and then you should be good.
Oh, I hadn't even realized I was asking to speak. That's funny. I was actually in the process of writing a comment saying that I was painting this morning a painting of an oil painting of Penobscot Bay, and it's a winter scene with the glow on the water. And having this presentation right after doing that really makes me miss being up there with you folks during the winter, because I'm a summer visitor, and I spend the winters here on Cape Cod, and I'm just about ready to get blasted by a nor'easter. But it's been very inspiring, and I'm ready to get back to my paintings after looking at all of yours. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Pamela. We have 2 more hands raised, and then we can go back to the chat box. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, so Kathy Odell has their hand raised. If you would like to ask your question.
Sure. That was really great presentations. Loved both of them. And just seeing the work over time in both instances, it got me to wondering about your choice of medium in any given case, and whether or not you choose a medium based on the subject in nature at all, or isn't that a consideration necessarily?
I'll take a stab at that. I like experimenting with different media, although I don't particularly like oil. I oil painted when I was a child and a teenager, and as an adult, I prefer water based media, and I even mix watercolor, pastel, acrylic, ink, all sorts of combinations on the same surface sometimes, and collage. If I know that I'm going to want lots of layers and thickness or complexity, acrylic works better for me, but sometimes I start with watercolor and then paint on top of the watercolor. And then sometimes it's a matter of convenience. If I'm traveling, I have a little traveling watercolor kit, so I don't have to take all that other stuff, and I can do some quick small things and then do larger things later at home. Leslie, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of an answer while you were talking. I'm glad you went first. I would say that the subject does inform the choice of medium, but mostly it's like, what do I feel like today? You know, do I, in the wintertime, my studio is a 10-minute walk away. So do I feel like walking the 10 minutes to my studio, or do I feel like staying home in my cozy condo and playing with watercolors, because that's what I have here. But in the summer, I do think that the complexity of the subject probably leads me to choose oil over watercolor, because watercolor, I do want to do watercolors quickly. You know, you can go in and change things, but not so much. And so if it's a very complicated architectural subject, for example, I would tend to attack it in oil. That said, I'm going crazy with watercolor in terms of doing complex things. So while I've been at home recovering from a knee replacement, for example, this is a watercolor still life I've been doing. I've got 5 of them that I've done so far. And so who knows? I guess it's the inspiration of the day. Thank
you both. We have one more hand raised, and then I'll pass it over to Lisa for questions in the chat box. Looks like Anne, I'm going to allow you to talk if you would like to.
Hi, thanks. It's hi Leslie, it's Anne and Richard calling from Boston.
Oh, hi.
Hi, we were one of the other families that Leslie mentioned that have a cottage in Surry on the Morgan Bay Road, and so I don't really have an art question per se, but just wanted to thank both of the Surry related artists, and we spend a lot of time when we're in Surry ourselves on Newbury Neck and Morgan Bay and Carter Nature Preserve and all the other places around the peninsula. And thanks to both of the trusts for all the great work that you're doing and for the inspiration that we also get in various ways from being there. So thank you all for the program. Say hi to Dan.
Thank you, Anne. That's really sweet.
We don't have too many questions. There is, let me see.
I see a genealogy question, which is very typical for Maine.
Yeah.
Someone asked me if my father was Larry Coffin. No, my father's name was Millard, but if you're referring to the cardiac surgeon at the University of Vermont, I did know him because I was a medical student in Vermont while he was still on the faculty there.
And then there's one question, Miss Leslie, is that you in your dreams in the background painting of the woman tending the garden? I believe that's your husband, right?
It is. It's actually Dan pulling weeds. Yes. It was a particularly good year for foxgloves. He's surrounded by foxgloves and Sweet William. You know, though, this is an interesting commentary because this painting is probably 10 years old, and he's out there in short sleeves. Never now, not since Lyme disease. I mean, he is out there in full court, insect shield, head to toe, pretty much.
So true. There is one more question. It says, you both are inspired by nature, but what are you ever inspired by other artists?
Would you like to go?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, definitely. I actually really like art history, and I like contemporary art. going back maybe 100 years or less. Lately, I've been looking at work by Emil Nold, especially his flower and landscape paintings. I also have been looking at work by a variety of contemporary artists. Sometimes I want to paint like Jackson Pollock. Sometimes I want to do sculptures. Sometimes I am inspired by John Marin and others of the Maine modernists. Some of you who are familiar with this part of Maine may have known Fran Merritt, who is the founding director of Haystack. I have a number of collages and prints by Fran that I find inspiring, both because of the way he used abstraction and also because I knew him. I went to Haystack for a printmaking course when I was 17, and Fran took an interest in making sure that I was safe there at that age. And he was a very kind man. Local artist Susan Webster, I took a workshop from her a few years ago and really learned quite a bit, and want to go back to gellet and plate printing and mono printing. It would probably take me all night to list off all the artists whose work I find interesting. Next week, we're going to Philadelphia to see the Philadelphia part of the Jasper Johns exhibit. I just had to do it despite the pandemic. So yes.
Yeah, so for me, first, last, and always Matisse, both for his sense of pattern and repetition and the rhythm in his painting. This is another one of these knee recovery watercolors that I'm working on, and the foreground isn't done, but it's looking at it, I thought, whoa, that's very Matisse-y. For color, especially greens, I like to look at Lois Dodd. She is a favorite contemporary Maine painter now in her 90s. And I would, in my dreams, I would like to be considered one of the Maine painters. So that includes Connie Hayes, Louise Bourne, Colin Page, Phil Fry. I know all of them. I love all of their work. And I aspire to play in their league.
Thank you both. We have several more questions that have come in. And actually, one of the questions was a question I had for you as well. Would you be willing to let us know what projects you're hoping to tackle next, or what subject matter you're moving toward?
Yes.
Well,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Cheryl. Well, okay, so I'm a member of the Deer Isle Artists Association, and our biggest fundraiser of the year is the 12 by 12 show in July. So every piece in the show has to be 12 by 12 by 12. And I used to just, kind of throw together a couple of things a few weeks before the show, but over the last couple of years, I've gotten more serious about it. So I have started my 12 by 12s. And if there are any other DIAA members out there listening, get cracking.
I'm going to return to abstraction based on things that I saw through the microscope. That's a recurring theme for me, and it's something that I can go to when I want to plunge back into painting. I've taken a little bit of a sabbatical during the holidays. I was painting really intensely all fall up until mid-December, and then I slowed down quite a bit just to be able to enjoy other things and take care of some other things for a while. So I think I'm going to go back to abstractions, but I also want to try to capture the snow, the ice, the light on the bay, especially in the late afternoon. We look east at our house, and there are reflections from the sunset in the west, both on the woods and on the water across the bay from us. and that's always really beautiful. So I want to work on that, and I'm sure when spring comes, I'll have a strong desire to take a look at the plants that start coming up and do something with those.
Yeah, and in terms, just if I could just add to my earlier comment, in terms of subject matter, every time I have ever taken a workshop and the instructor says, "What is your goal for this workshop?" I say, "I want to become less descriptive and more evocative." And I never succeed. So that's actually what I am working on now. I am painting landscapes, but instead of trying to do the whole big, the rocks, the trees, the skies, I'm trying to zoom in on a detail or an aspect, the reflection or the light, and make a painting that will be representational in that you know what it is, but not in any way reflective of reality.
That's so inspiring. Thank you both. Lisa, do you want to take the next question in the chat box?
Sure. So this one is from a young artist in their mid-20s. They love to paint, but haven't for several years. I often feel inspired to get back into it, but don't know where to start and how to not put too much pressure on myself artistically. Where did you find the push to make your time for your art?
I could probably answer that because I can remember over the years some of the constant juggling of job responsibilities or educational responsibilities versus artistic desire. I think trying not to put pressure on yourself, but perhaps making a commitment to do something almost every day, even if it's only doodling for 10 minutes or sketching something that you find where you live or that you see out your window, and using a meditative approach. There's a book that several people recommended to me called Zen Seeing, Zen Drawing, that helps you become absorbed in what you're seeing, and instead of worrying about whether you're representing something accurately. And I find that approach helps me lose track of time and become deeply involved in the process. It's hard though, because sometimes at the end, I look at something and I think, oh, yuck, boy, I really want to rip that up or burn it. And sometimes I do, but keeping going and not worrying about those pieces that you may not be entirely happy with. Sometimes it's good to save them and look at them later and think about what else you could do, or what did I learn from doing that?
Yeah, I would certainly second that, or tear them up and make collages, which is what I did a lot of when I was transitioning from watercolor into more solid media. But for me, I was an arty kid. I was always drawing and illustrating stories, and spent hours in my room with my pencils and my paints. And then when I got to be a sophomore in high school, I took art freshman and sophomore year. I couldn't take it anymore because the pressures of the college prep curriculum were just too much. And the same thing happened in college. I tried taking studio art the first 2 years, but I wasn't going to be an art major, and wasn't an art major, and it just took too much time up. So I let it go. And I would say that don't beat yourself up. If you can make time, really want to do it, and can make time to do it, you will do it. But for me, I pretty much didn't pick up anything from the time I was a sophomore in college until I turned 50. And it was all there. It was all right there. It just, you'll always have it.
I have another comment to the young artist, and that is that when I was working as a professor of pathology, both doing clinical work and research, I found that those times when I made time for painting or drawing on the weekend, either at home or maybe even by taking a workshop, that break from the intensity of medical practice actually became synergistic with my research, especially the research part of medicine. I don't know how that happens in the brain, but when I was actively painting or drawing, then the intensely cognitive part of my pathology work went a lot better. And that still happens. I go back and forth. Even though I'm retired from clinical practice, I'm still involved in some research and some writing with other people. And I find that if I've painted intensely for a while, I want to go back to the writing and figuring out some problem that needs to be solved. And then if I do that for a while, I just can't wait to get back to the studio. And that's where I am right now. Can't wait to get back to the studio. So you might find that rhythm in your own life.
That's really wonderful advice. Thank you. And it looks like Annie is sharing her thanks in the chat box as well. Do you ever, I have a quick question for you, and I'm checking the time now, it is 5, so we won't keep you on here too much longer, but do you ever teach art workshops yourselves? You mentioned attending other local workshops and going places to take classes. Have you ever taught any yourselves?
I've never taught. I've had friends over to play around the kitchen table or in the studio, mostly making collages. I don't know if I know how to teach. I do enjoy getting together and painting or drawing with other people from time to time. And I think I'd like to do the group collage activity with friends and acquaintances once the pandemic slows down a bit. That can be really fun.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, I used to teach watercolor in the summer, and I made a conscious decision not to, because it's my plein air season. It is so short, and I very jealously guard those hours and minutes when I can paint outdoors.
That totally makes sense. Thank you for answering that question. Is there anything else, Lisa, that we want to ask our presenters before we let them go for dinner and the rest of the evening?
I
have a question. First of all, how can people find the link to see the recording of this? Because I've had several questions about that. And secondly, can I still look at the comments once we're done?
Really good questions. Let me see. Yes, I think I can save the chat and then I think send it to you. So I'm going to try and do that.
Oh, great.
I don't know if I ever have, but I'm going to attempt that so that you can look through them. And then
that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll give that a go and see if it works. And then the link to this recording will probably be up on both of our websites, the Island Heritage Trust and the Blue Heritage Trust, plus the Blue Heritage Trust YouTube channel within like a week. And I can send both Sheryl and Leslie that link. So then if you have friends, you can pass it on if they can't find it on our websites for some reason. But yes, that will be out there pretty soon.
That's great.
Yeah. Looks like we just have some more comments coming in. Thank you all out there for joining us tonight on this chilly evening. And if you're in Maine and preparing for the storm coming up this weekend, good luck and stay safe. And thank you for joining from other states and places as well. It's fun to know that we had all of you here tonight. It says, let's see if you have a question. It'd be helpful to have both websites listed. I wonder if we could probably put that in the chat box really quick. Lisa, do you want to grab Island Heritage Trust and I'll get Blue Hill?
Absolutely.
Cool. Okay. All right, so hopefully that will be helpful. You could just copy and paste those links. And Beth Dickens is another staff at Blue Hill Heritage Trust, and she's texting in that we can probably also put links on YouTube. So I'll make sure to do that as well.
So I just want to make one last plug before we sign off. If any of you are feeling generous and would like to up your participation in the trust to the Heritage Society level, which is, help me out, Lander, is it $1,000 and up, or is it it's in that neighborhood?
I think so.
Or if you want to join
the one to ask.
if you want to join the 4-figure club, you will be invited to a cocktail party that Dan and I will be hosting at the farm and gallery in late August. So get out your checkbooks.
Thank you for that, Leslie. And Beth confirms that it is the $1,000 mark. All right. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful night. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me or Lisa, and we'll get back to you.
Thank you. It was really fun.
Thanks. It was a great time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you both.
All right. Take care.
You too.
Thanks.
Stay safe.